Hello! In this video I'd like to show you MaxScript. So MaxScript is the scripting language inside of 3ds Max that allows users with little or no programming experience to automate some of their tasks through commands. Now all of that sounds a little bit intimidating, but I assure you it's very useful and it's actually not too difficult to get your head around. I will give an introduction to MaxScript and an overview of how you might use the language, and then work towards at least some of this fairly straightforward MaxScript tool, which allows me to sort of randomize things. So to see what that does, I can make a selection of objects, and I can randomize their positions and their rotations and their scales, things like that. I can also change their colors to a variety of different colors and things. Okay, so that's the script that we'll be working towards at the end, but first of all we need an introduction to some of the basics of MaxScript. Okay, so where do we begin with MaxScript? First of all, I suppose it's worth pointing out where you can actually input MaxScript. And you can do that down here. It's not the only place, but let's start with here just as somewhere to go from. Just as a test scene, I'm going to make a couple of boxes and a sphere in this scene. I'm going to deselect everything. And I'm just going to put in a really simple command just to demonstrate that you can put in your commands here. This command is going to select any objects with the name box at the beginning of them. And sure enough, it selected both of my boxes and not my sphere. Okay, so that's where we can put it in. But how do we know what commands to use? And that's where the MaxScript listener comes in. So we can get the MaxScript listener by going to the MaxScript menu and going to MaxScript listener or pressing F11. That brings up this pink and white box. And you may well have this set up so that it's like this. If that's the case, just drag this down. Also make sure that you've got macro recorder set to enabled. The reason we do this, if I now clear these, I can right click and do clear all or press Ctrl and D. I'm just going to clear these so these are empty again. By having macro recorder enabled, whenever I do anything in my interface or make a new object or anything really, it'll tell me what the MaxScript command is to do that thing. So something as simple as selecting this sphere will tell me I've selected it. If I move it, it'll tell me the command for moving it. And this is very helpful as a way of learning Max commands. Okay, so let's try making a bit of a command now. I'm going to delete all of these, and I'll set up a new scene just with some boxes. Oops, not quite that close together. There we go. Okay, just a few boxes in the scene. So let's say I want to scale these boxes. I can do this in the command and see the command is scale, and then we have a long sort of number thing here. All that is scale, and then this $sign, that just means selection. It's a shorthand for selection. So scale my selection by an amount of, and everything in the brackets is what I want to scale it by. 1, which is not going to scale it at all. 1, not going to scale at all, so the X and Y haven't been scaled, and the Z axis has been scaled by a number of 1.7. Okay, so I can now do this again by copying this command, and either I can put it in here and press enter, which will scale it a further 1.7, or I can put it down here, or I can use the MaxScript editor. Let's look at that now, because it gives us a little bit more room. So if you haven't already got a tab open, I think it'll have one open by default, but you can just go to File, New, and that'll make you a new MaxScript. To run MaxScripts from here, pressing Enter will not run the script. Instead, you have to press either Control and E or go to Tools, Evaluate All. I won't be going to this, I'll just be pressing Control and E from now on. So if I press Control and E, sure enough, it runs it again. So what about if I select these three guys? Now, we would hope that because we're scaling the selection, this would work on all of them, and sure enough it will. Cool. What about if I do all of them? They're all going to go up. Great. So right now we're not doing anything that we couldn't already do inside of Max. And in many ways that's not really the point of MaxScript, to do things that you can't already do. It's more about letting the computer do the hard work for repetitive tasks and that sort of thing, and making possible some things that would just be unfeasibly time-consuming to do. Let's delete these and we'll start some new boxes again. So assuming that we're not going to want to do a selection as simple as that, we're going to want to do something different to each of these. Well, how do we look at each of them in turn? And that's where we use loops. So let's take a look at our first loop. So I'm just going to use for O in, and I can use the shortcut for selection, which is just the $do, and then I'll make some brackets. Right. I'll just type a little bit more and then I'll explain what's going on. O dot scale dot y equals do. Okay. So what I have here is a command which says for, and we're making a new what's called a variable for the variable O in the selection, do, and then it will do this lot of stuff here for each of the O's. So if I were to pick 5 objects here, my selection is of 5 elements. So for each of those elements, the first element is going to be called O, and then we'll run this. So for the first element O, do this. And then the second time it runs, the O will be for the next one along. So let's do that on the first 3 and see what happens. Control and E. So I've scaled them in Y by 2. One thing to note is you can't actually always undo cleanly from MaxScript. Sometimes you can, like I just did there, but just be aware that sometimes you can't. So always save your scene regularly, or better yet, just work on a dummy scene like I'm doing here. So I'm going to change this to Z so that we can see this a little easier. Well, why would we do that when we could already essentially do that before? Well, the benefit here is we can do things differently inside of here, and we can do things like if conditions. So let's say, let's use a variable now. So let's just call it count. Okay, I'm calling it iCount because it's reminding me that it's an integer. You don't need to worry too much about that, but it's a good practice. So I'm going to start it off at 1. And what I'm going to do is each time I run this, I'm going to increase my iCount by 1. So what's happening is for each time it runs it, iCount becomes itself plus 1. So it'll get 1 bigger each time. There's actually an easier way to write this. We can write this as plus equals 1. And it means the exact same thing. So it'll just go up by 1 each time. So now, how about we scale it by the iCount? So hopefully you'll have a guess at what this is going to do. But what we're expecting it to do is each time it runs, so for the first item it will scale by 1 plus 1, so it'll be 2. For the second item, this will be 2 at this point, so it'll be 2 plus 1 is 3. So the first item will scale by 2, the next by 3, the next by 4, the next by 5. Though, as it happens, it doesn't usually go through these in the order we would expect it to. It'll probably start on this one. But let's take a look. So there we go. It went through from this one, scaled it by 2, and the next one by 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. There's one other loop that's quite useful, although you'll probably be using the for loop the most. Another loop type is the while loop. So again, I'm going to declare iCount is, we'll start it at 0 this time, and we'll do while iCount is less than 5, do, open brackets, close brackets. We're going to use a new command here. This one's quite useful for your sort of debugging purposes, to tell you what's going on under the hood of the MaxScript. When you get a long and complicated MaxScript, it can be a little bit confusing to know where it got to and things like that. So this command just shows up in the MaxScript listener whatever you tell it to say. So I'm going to use print, and then I'm going to say open quotes. In fact, I'll put it in brackets first. Open quotes, and quotes indicate it's a string. So iCount is, and I do close quotes. I'm going to use plus to join it with the number iCount. And to be safe, though, you don't always have to do this. Sometimes it does it fine. I'm going to say iCount as string. Because the print command requires that you use a string, and iCount, because we set it to being 0, it's actually an integer. This just forces it to be a string. So let's we need to do one more thing first. We need to actually increase the iCount each time we run this, otherwise it'll go on forever, and let that be a warning to you. If you have an infinite loop, then you'll probably just crash Max, and it's not good. So don't forget to save your Maxscript often. So iCount plus equals 1. Okay, let's give that a go. What happened now, if I just expand this so we can see what it told me, is it gave me the output iCount is 0, then it went up to iCount is 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and it didn't give me 5 because when iCount became 5, it broke this condition. Okay. Another thing that you can do, which if I put this now above, you can use continue to end a while loop. So I could say that I only want to output iCount is whatever for when iCount is less than 3. So to do that, let's use an if statement. So we haven't looked at if statements yet, but they're really straightforward, and they are sort of self-explanatory in what they are. So if iCount is less than 3, this is a lot like the while statement we made before. In fact, no, let's use if it's greater than, I'll tell you what, I'll show you the two different ways to do the same thing. So if iCount is less than 3, print it, okay? So I'll just clear this, Control D, and run this. So we got iCount is 1, iCount is 2, and then it finished. Another way to do it is if it is greater than or equal to 3, and if I pop this below, and here I'm going to write continue. And what continue will do is it will skip the rest of the while block and just go to the next one. So this should probably give the same result. So it pretty much did. Just got a slightly different thing at the end here. The thing at the end, if you're curious, is the way Maxscript works is when it finishes something, whatever its sort of most recent thing was, that is the value it is returning. Which will make sense when we look at functions in a bit. But while we're on the subject of ifs, if statements, let's look at some other conditions we can do. So we've looked at less than and greater than. Another one we can do is equal to. So let's now, just because it's a little bit easier to understand this way around, so now we're going to only print if it's equal to 3. So let's try that. Clear this out now. And sure enough, it only printed when it was equal to 3. Another one is not equal to, so this is an exclamation mark and an equal to, and now it's skipped 3. A quick note, if you just do just a single equal, that isn't the right way we write a condition, and as a result I'm not quite sure what happens. Oh, yeah, it gets angry. Anytime you see the red text, it means you've probably done something wrong, so just be aware of that. So let's see if I can make any human sense out of this. So it's telling me that type error, the if test requires a Boolean class, got 3. What that's sort of saying in programmery terms is the if statement is expecting to get either a true or false. That's what a Boolean class is. And all conditions are actually just like comparisons. So iCount equals 3 is a sort of, you're asking a question there. iCount is 3 rather than single question equals, which is like iCount is 3. Probably doesn't make any sense at all, but just use 2 equals if you're doing an if statement or a while and that kind of thing. Okay, so equals, not equal, greater than, less than. Fairly straightforward. You can use less than with just one, as I have here. Good. We can also use comparisons with more than just numbers. We can do if o.name equals box or whatever. And if we had a object or something like that, then it would be asking if the object's name is box. So there's that too. You'll notice that I have been tabbing things out. This is just a neatness thing. You don't actually have to do this, but I do recommend it. Sometimes it can be nice to just pop things onto one line. So this one might be a candidate for one line. So you just put them on one line. It's not as easy to read though, so I don't recommend it unless you really, really like that. Okay, one more thing before we go on to our sort of demonstration, and that is functions. So functions are a little bit more sophisticated, but they're not, impossibly so. So let's declare a function. So we're just going to call this add. This is a really simple function. In fact, no, we're just going to do a hello world first. Let's call it function talk to me, and we're just going to do equals. We're going to do a new thing, a little bit like a loop. We're putting it in tabbed and everything. We're just going to use a new command, message box, hello. Okay. So if we execute this, I'm just going to close this out. What happens? It says that talk to me it's happened or it's there, but it's not executing any of this, and that's because a function is something that we can ask the Maxscript to call. We can do that quickly and easily lots of times, but we actually have to ask it to do that. So let's do that now. So if I were to write talk to me just like this, what would happen is pretty much the same thing again, except it would sort of you're sort of saying, is it there? So to actually run it, we need to put the brackets in, and that says I want to run it in its own sort of weird little way. And sure enough, it says hello, which is good. So that's one type of function. I'm now actually going to make this script a little bit bigger so that you get used to seeing a script that gets a bit bigger without being too intimidated. And I'm going to use a new function. So this function we're going to use, here we were just using a function to do something. This time around we're going to use a function that has some variables built into it. So I'm going to make it a function called rotate me. I'm going to have a variable obj and a amount x amount. Okay, that'll do for now. So we're going to do it equal to, and all we're going to do is we're going to ask it to take the object that we're feeding it here, so obj. We're going to say rotation dot x amount equals x amount. In fact, we'll use plus equals so that it's incrementing by that amount. So let's make ourselves a box, and instead of calling talk to me, we're now going to call rotate me. Okay, and we're now going to feed it some variables. We can either put them in brackets or we can use spaces. So we're going to use as our object the object we actually have selected. So we're just going to use $, as our object, and the amount we're just going to use 30. So let's see what happens now. If I run this script, it's telling me it doesn't know what x amount is. Okay, so it was just me being a bit silly. This isn't x amount, this is x rotation. Okay, so now let's try that again. I'll just undo the rotation I did there. So pressing Control need to evaluate, and it rotates it. And if I run it again, it rotates it again, and again, and again, and again. Eee, all around. Okay, so that is using a function when you're giving it inputs. If I were to change the inputs here to 90, then evaluate, then it's moving it by 90 each time. So that's easy enough. I could also even feed, if I again use the same sort of logic that we were using before. So it's not very easy to tell the spheres because you can't tell when they're rotating. Here we go, slightly better example. So let's use a few cylinders and a couple of boxes. Okay. Now this time let's just use that expression again. So box star. Now let's see what happens. It rotates the boxes by 90 degrees, but it doesn't touch the cylinders. If I were to do this expression here, that would just be rotating everything no matter what's selected. So I only have one box selected, but now it's rotating everything. Okay, so these are quite useful little commands to learn. It's just $star is everything, dollar on its own is just your selection, dollar box star or whatever you might have is anything that begins with the word box. You could easily use $star, anything ending in 01, which I think will be just 2 objects with it. Yeah, so it's just those two happen to end in 01. Okay, so that is using a function that has variables. One other little functiony thing you might use is a function that returns a value. So here we're just doing something. Here we're doing something using variables. Now we're going to return something using variables. So as an example, let's use a function that sort of works out the bounding, the volume of the object. The bounding box is volume. So let's call it bounding volume. And the input we want to just be an object. We want it to be equal to, okay, and all we have to return is the actual value that we're making it equal to. So if I just put 5, then it would always return 5. I don't need to write bounding volume equals 5, which in some languages you would do. So you don't need to do that, just the number that you want to returning. And we actually want to return, and I'm just going to copy paste this because I'm feeling lazy, this command here, and all this is saying the object's maximum point in x minus the object's minimum point in x, so that's the length, multiplied by y take y, so the height, the depth, and then the height. Okay, so it's just going to return a value. So let's see that in action. So let's just print bounding volume $. So this is just going to print the bounding volume of the two objects. So let's evaluate that. I'll clear this first. Okay, so let's try evaluating that. If we look at this now, we can see that it ran bounding volume just the once. And the reason for that is because I'm not looping through anything, so it just actually took the first object, because this doesn't handle objects. Sorry, arrays. This just handles a single object. So that's why it's only worked for one of them. But for our purposes, that's actually okay. We could start changing this around, but I don't see there's a need to. So why would we want to return a value? Well, the answer is if we wanted to do a condition on it. So let's say if bounding volume, let's go for O in $, do, just our standard for every object in our selection, do if bounding volume is, bounding volume of the object, and because we've got two little things there, it tends to like to have it in brackets. If it's greater than or equal to, let's just look at what sort of approximate values we've got. So this is like 100,000. 100,000 do, and what will we do? We'll do, let's just print found a whopper. Okay, so it's just going to tell us every time it finds a large object, it will say found a whopper. In fact, to be a little bit more sensible, let's call it something called, and let's give it the o.name is the name of the object. So let's put that in brackets, and that might need to be as string. I'm just being safe here. Some of this stuff isn't necessary, but you know, and because that's a long line, let's just, there we go, separate it out a bit. Okay, so it's going to go through all the objects, and I'm just going to make these a little bit smaller and things so that we've got some choices. So I'm not sure which ones are going to come out as being big, but let's find out. So if I evaluate this now, I'll just clear these out. Oops, and evaluate. So what does it think is big? So it hasn't actually come up with any of them. That might be correct. Let's find out. If I just reduce, I think I said 10,000, didn't I? Let's try that again. Yeah, so I just put in too many zeros there. So it reckons that cylinder 001, box 003, and box 001 are the big ones. Let's see if that's the case. Cylinder 001, box 001, box 003. So these are the three that it picked as being the whoppers, and they certainly are the biggest. Cool. So that's using a function to return a value. And obviously, just writing this is a little bit easier than writing all of this stuff. And indeed, you may have much more complicated things that you want to put into your functions. Okay, so all of this is kind of very academic. Let's do a real example now. So I'm going to open a new scene and make a new script. Okay, so I've got myself a new scene and a new script, and I'm ready to get started. As you saw from the beginning of the video, I had something of a user interface, which is really easy to do. We have a tool to do that. So if we go to Tools, and we go to New Rollout, that's what they're called rollouts, we get this big old interface, which I can scale this down a little bit. Okay, and this grey box, as you might have guessed, is the area that we have to make our stuff in. So I can make a new button by just going down to here and click dragging, and I can use the common ones I tend to use are buttons. Group boxes are quite nice to put things inside of, just a little bit easier for legibility. Checkboxes, quite common. Spinners I use quite a lot. You may want a slider if it's the sort of appropriate kind of thing. Labels, just let you write things. So let's take a look at some of these now. So as I select through each of these, they have different properties. Caption tends to be the words that you see in the interface. So if I were to call this randomizer tool or something like that, and hit enter, you can see that it changes the text to that. I can turn on the grid to help me sort of lay things out, which is quite nice. So I can easily get things to be the same sort of distance from both sides if I scale this to be proper size. Yeah. And I can change again the button here, so we can call this do something, and we can see it here. The name here is what we're going to refer to it in the script as. And if possible, you should try and label keep the first 3 letters the same, because then people, if anyone looks at your script later, they know what it is, and it reminds you what it is. So you might call this button underscore do something like that. This I don't think can have spaces in, can it? Oh, seems to think it does, but I tend to try and keep spaces out of it because I think you'll come up with problems if you do that. So try not to use any spaces. Enable just forces the user not to be able to use it. It kind of grays out and stuff if you set it to false. The rest is really fairly self-explanatory. When you've got spinners like these, the range here, the first is the minimum, then you've got the maximum, and then you've got the third number is the default value. So I'm going to put that to 50. And let's do the same sort of thing with this one. So 20, and let's say, oops, just delete the comma there, 20. Good, so let's say we're done with our interface. This is obviously not what we're going for, but just as an example. Let's now hit save. Now, what has happened is we now, in our Maxscript window, it's started to write some Maxscript, and that's all that the rollout is. It's just script telling it how to make it. Which means if we wish, we can come in, we can edit the values here. So I could make the one that's at 20, the maximum could be 40. Okay. Let's now try executing our script. And it tells us there's a rollout called unnamed rollout, but nothing actually happens. So how do we see the rollout? Well, that's easy enough. We just need to use a command called create dialog. And you can see it goes blue, showing it's a proper command. And I probably should name this something better, but for now I'll just use unnamed rollout. Now if we execute our script, we get our interface, and we can click buttons, and we can change checkboxes and move spinners and things like this. Cool, but none of it actually does anything. And that's where we need to start assigning script commands to the events and stuff like that. But rather than go through and make the user interface, I'm just going to copy from the one I had a moment ago that you already saw. So let's grab that in a really cheaty way. There it is. So that's all the stuff that I'd already done. And in fact, I might even just copy the name as well. Really cheating now. Okay. And because I changed the name of it, in fact, actually, I'm going to deliberately do something inverted quotes wrong here. Just to demonstrate something. So right now I've changed how my interface looks, and I've given it a different name, the rollout name. I'm going to do Control and E. And what's happened is it's actually come up with the old one. That's because we've got the old name, but if we're not actually saying what unnamed rollout is, how does it get that? That's actually because unless you put things in brackets and sort of at the top level you're not, then all the variables that are happening are persistent. So when we made the unnamed rollout before, it's still there, and it always still will be until I close Max down. So there's just a kind of a quirk that might affect something you do, but probably won't. So let's now, instead of spawning the old one, let's populate it with the new one, and let's evaluate it, and yeah, we get all this stuff, but none of it does anything. like we saw in the video, this is all supposed to be doing things. So we obviously need to plug things together. So where do we start? Well, let's have a look at trying to just make a button do something. Let's keep it simple for the moment. If I want to give a script to a button, I need to actually do that inside of the rollout. So we've got all of the user interface elements, and it's probably not a bad idea to now start using comments. So comments are just things that don't do any script, but they just they're useful if you're reminding yourself what different bits are. So I'm going to call this UI, and we indicate it's a comment with a dash dash. You can also comment things out using slash star and then close that with star slash, and that'll just block comment something out, but I don't actually want to do that. That's just demonstrating the point. So how do we, if we run our interface again, let's say that we want the deselect button to give us a message just so that we know what's going on. That's easy enough to do. We find the code name of the deselect button, which hopefully is at the top. Yeah. If I go into edit rollout, oh, didn't like that at all. One moment while we experience technical difficulties. I'll be right back. Okay, sorry about that. So now will be a good time to save after it just crashed. So I can just save it as tutorial script. And yeah, you're going to need to save regularly because you might crash it. Right, so where were we? We were trying to do something when we did the button select. So yeah, the button select name is, I'm not going to go into it because it didn't like me editing it last time, but that's probably just because I've copy pasted it from another script. It didn't like that. It lost its connection or whatever. But that's, remember where I told you where the code name was. It's not the caption. Okay, this is the caption. This is the name field. So let's use that now. So on, then the name of the thing, pressed, do. So in the case of a button, the pressed command is just whenever you click the button, it will do this. So for most interfaces, buttons are pretty much what you do most of the time. So on button deselect pressed do, we just want to do something. So let's use message box hello. Good. So let's now execute that and see what happens if we press deselect. Cool. So now we have the right command to right code to do stuff inside of here. So in the case of this deselect command, what it's supposed to be doing, if I run the thing again, is there's a field here, and we want to make it so that there's a probability of 35% that any of the objects in the current selection will be deselected. Okay, so how are we going to go about that? As a general formatting thing, what I like to do is actually not put really any code inside of the event handlers. I prefer to put them inside of functions. On the whole, this is useful because you can reuse them another time more easily. But even inside of this code, if I look at the position stuff, we're wanting this to randomize the position of stuff. You can pretty much tell that the code I'm going to be using is almost exactly the same. So I'd rather put the meat of the code inside a function and just use that one function rather than write out the same lines for each of these buttons. Okay, so let's make a new function called function, or let's call it just random deselect. Okay, or rand. There we go, just a little bit shorter. And what I'll do with all these functions, I'll call them all rand because then it's consistent. But yeah, so function deselect equals and open brackets. Now we want it to do something. So this is one of those functions that we're getting it to do something. So we're not really caring about returning anything. We're just doing something. So what do we want to do? We want to, in fact, before I forget, I'm going to actually make sure that when we press the button, it actually does it. So run deselect, done. Putting those brackets in there so that it actually runs it. Okay, so let's think about how we're going to run this. We want to go through every object. We want to make a random number, and if the random number is less than 35, we want to deselect it. However, if I just do for O in $, O in $do, I think this will come across a problem, but let's just run it through as I might sort of be thinking it through myself. For every object in the selection, we're going to want to make a random number. So we want if our random number, and that's a keyword, so it's doing something special there, and we want a random number between 0.0 and 100.0. Any random number between 0 and 100. By using the 0.0, I'm making it use a float. If I just put 0 and 100, it would still work, but I would only get integer values. I'd get 0, 1, 2, 3. I wouldn't get any 0.5s or 50.3s or anything like that. And I want those, so because I'm giving the user the ability to use the decimal place. So if the random number is less than or equal to, we want to grab the field here. So if it's less than or equal to, and again, on the whole, I like to keep these out of the functions. I'd rather keep them in the event handling stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new variable. So I'm going to say random deselect, and I'm going to go probability. Well, let's just call it prob. And I want to now feed the random deselect a probability, which is going to be the spinner deselect. So I'm going to feed it the value in spinner deselect. So spinner deselect dot value. Good. So when we execute this function, we'll say please run random deselect, and the value of prob will be, in this case, 35. But if they've changed it, it'll be whatever that is. So now I can do less than or equal to prob. Then, and this is really simple. We just use. I'm just going to put it on one line. Deselect. Okay, let's see if that works. I've got a feeling this didn't, because I don't remember doing it this way, but if it does, then cool. Let's just clear these out. You'll notice that each time I close this down, if I run deselect, it's still not doing anything because this is from an old version. I just need to close it and open it again, and that will use the new one. So right now I've got 25 objects. Let's see if this works. Okay, so it did. Cool. So now gone to 16 objects, and 12, 10, 9, 7. And we're going down each time by about a third. If I slide this up to 75, starting from 25 objects, we'd expect to have maybe 6 left, something like that. Oh, okay, so that's a lot more than expected, but seems to be about half right now. Is that what we would expect? Let's put this up to 90. It's always good to do this sort of testing. So that's quite unexpected to be ending up halving it when our probability is as much as 90. Let's take it down and see if this is even using this at all, which I'm beginning to doubt it is. So deselect. Okay, so it seems to be using it, but for some reason when it's greater than 50, it doesn't seem to be working as we'd expect. So let's select them all, deselect. Yeah, there's no way with let's leave it at 99.9. Yeah, it's only ever getting rid of half. Okay, so I think the reason for that is, and this is why I said I didn't think this was going to work. When we're feeding it when we're using the selection here, it's going to the first item, it's deselecting it, and then it's going to the second item. But because it deselected it, it pushed the second item into the first position. So if I've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G as the names of my objects, it's going to look at the A, and it's going to say deselect A, and then that's going to leave what's in the selection as B, C, D, E, and so on. But because it thinks it's done the first item, it's moving on to the second item. And that's not B, that's C now, because we got rid of A. So it's not even looked at B. So this is why it's only doing half of them. You get sort of these sorts of problems when you start using your selection. So what we're going to do instead, we're actually just going to approach it from a completely different angle. What we're going to do is we're not going to deselect objects that we don't like. We're going to actually say if they aren't in the range that we want, we're going to append them to a new array. So we're going to make a new selection, which is an array. So to make an array, we just use this. So what's an array? An array is just a collection of objects. Every time we were using the footo in dollar, we were actually, the selection here is an array of objects. When I had 25 objects selected or whatever it was, that was 25 objects in an array that we were going through. So if I make new selection is just an array, And what I'm going to do is for every object in the selection, I'm not going to deselect it. If it's greater than the probability, I'm just going to append it to the new selection array. Okay, and then once I'm done, I'm going to select the new selection. So what's going to happen is I'm going to go through with an empty array, and for every object, if this was 35, if my probability is greater than 35, then I've not been deselected. I'm being added to the new selection of ones I do want to have selected. Okay, so let's close that and see how that works. So let's put this up to 99 or something high. There we go, and hit deselect. But what I did find was when I lowered it, I got an error, which is argument count error, append wanted 2, got 1. And this is quite a common error, not necessarily with just append, but the sort of wanted 2, got 1. It means you've used the wrong number of variables in your array. And what I basically forgot to say was I'm appending the new selection, but with what? So I actually wanted to append it with O. I think that's the right way around, but if it's not, then it'll just give me an error and I'll fix it then. So no, it's happy with that. And that seems to be working now. So if I try using 95, so deselecting 95%, sure enough, got rid of most of them. If I now try deselecting just 5%, or something like that, yeah, I'm only getting rid of 1 or 2 at a time here. I have to click it a lot of times to get rid of them all. Okay, so that's now working. Good. I'll probably not bother typing out the rest of this. Instead, what I'll do is I'll open it up from the finished script and let's just have a quick walk through it. There we go. Okay, so we've got the user interface that we already know about. Deselection works pretty much the same way as I just did it then. I've got a function to move by a random position. My function is called random position. I've got an object that I'm feeding it. That's what's going to be moved, and I've got a value for x, a value for y, and a value for z. Those are the values in here, 10, 10, 10 in this case. So what it's doing is it's moving the object's position by a random value between negative this and positive this. So when this is set to 10, it moves it by a random amount between minus 10 and positive 10. Fairly straightforward. And does the same for y, z, z. The difference between these buttons here, let's have a look now at the buttons and see what they're doing. These are further down. As I said, I like to keep the things separate. So for when I press all of them, it's doing, for every object in the selection, do the random position function of the object, so the one we're going through, and just the spinner value in x, the spinner value in y, and the spinner value in z. When I just want to move them in x, I'm running the exact same script, the exact same function, random position, move O, but I'm only moving the value for x is, I'm getting that from this spinner x, but instead of getting the other two values, I'm just putting 0. So it's moving them in y by a value between plus 0 and minus 0, and in z by 0. So this just means that I'm using the same function 4 times, and it's just, I only have to maintain one function. That's good practice. Rotation is pretty much the exact same thing, and scale was a little bit more tricky. I challenge you to have a go at scale and see why that one was more tricky. It was just because to make it nice and usable, I wanted to have it so that it wasn't possible to scale negatively, and also if I put in a value of, let's say if I put in a value of 4 for these here, it can scale them anywhere between ×4 and 1/4. Okay, but obviously this isn't working because I'm running the old one. Oops. Oops. So there we go. Let's put in 4 here, and you can see it's scaling them by amounts between 1/4 and 4, rather than +4 and -4, which would not be very good. So perhaps have a go at this if you want some practice. This is all very manageable. There's nothing that you can't now do out of this script. The color one, you don't really need anything more for that other than to know how to put in wire color, but you know how to find out a command. So change the wire color, really straightforward there. So you know everything you need to know to do the color as well. So yeah, have a go with it. See if you can get some cool Maxscripts going. Although they might seem like they take a long time to set up, they'll probably save you a lot of time in the future, and they'll open up doors that were previously closed because of the length of time that would have been needed and your sanity that would have been lost trying to do something as tedious as rotating 100 objects randomly. You would have just avoided the problem or done it in a perhaps less good way. So yeah, good luck with it. Have fun.